say, what is a World Cafe? A World Cafe is a way of hosting conversations that matter, in which you have the opportunity, and we're going to play with that today, the opportunity to cross-pollinate in some creative and interesting ways, and to connect. Imagine we could be in a room where you are sitting at an intimate table of 4, but you could have 1,000 people in that room with 250 tables. And just what we'll be doing here tonight, with the help of some technology that allows us to hear each other, would be happening in that space. So the World Cafe has evolved as a way to really connect intimacy and scale when we have either this number or any larger number. When it's smaller, you might want to have a circle instead. Today, our time today is going to be organized in a particular kind of way. And we've done it more as the flow of a learning cafe, so that we'll have pauses to share why we're doing what we're doing, okay? So I want to begin by sharing some context about my own learning journey, about conversation itself, and about how life works, because it makes a huge difference to how we think about our own role as facilitative leaders. And these were big ahas for me, and I want to share some of that story with you so that together we can step into that what if space. And then we'll talk a bit about, at the end of that, about the cafe and how a cafe actually works, so that those of you who have been part of cafes before, feel free to, you'll be able to help others. We'll have our cafe conversation. There'll be 2 parts of that and a harvest. I want to share a little bit about how the World Cafe, you see, we think of the World Cafe as a method, and those of you who have experienced the World Cafe have experienced it probably as a method. But the World Cafe is also a metaphor, and we'll play with that as we get back, go deeper. And the World Cafe is also part of a movement, a global movement, bringing these kinds of participatory ways of working into many settings around the globe. So I want to share a little bit about our own learning journey. The World Cafe was actually born in our living room with 6 tiny cafe tables with 4 people around them, and it was born by accident. We were hosting a dialogue of the early days of knowledge management. That field had not even been invented then. And it was a cross-disciplinary dialogue that we were hosting, and it was raining outside, and by accident we decided, okay, we can't have our normal dialogue circle, because we would normally be bringing people out to the patio and then bringing them into a circle. So we decided to put up our little TV tables, and people began to talk at the TV tables, and as they did, because our graphic recorder had come in and said, oh, these are looking kind of cute, I think I'm going to put some little markers on the table. And then I said, oh wow, that looks kind of cute, I'm going to put some flowers on the table. And people walked in to, she had made a sign that said, welcome to the Homestead Cafe. We lived on a dirt road called Homestead. And so what happened was the conversation began, and we noticed that people were there writing they were writing right there, because we didn't have any tablecloths. We just had stick these little papers on the top. And what was so incredible about it was that after we began to realize that people were actually talking about what had been the question that they had been exploring the night before, which was, what is the relationship between leadership and intellectual capital? And what was amazing was that as they were writing on their tablecloths, we began to see that things were beginning to happen in a way, and David said to me, I don't think we should start the meeting. This is the meeting, because we were going to have them put back their tables and come back into a circle. As they began to talk, somebody in the room said, hey, I want to know what's happening at the other tables. Why don't we leave one host at the table and have the others travel, right? So if I was the host, 3 new people came to me and they'd been in 3 different conversations. And as that began to happen, and someone else then said, oh, after about another 30 minutes said, hey, why don't we leave someone else at the table and see what happens and keep moving? By the end of that morning, when we finally pushed the tables back and we rolled out a big mural on the floor, actually, and had people walking around to discover what was in the middle of the tablecloth, the big tablecloth, let's say, in the middle of the room, we were absolutely astounded. And I had been part of the MIT Dialogue Project, the research project around dialogue, where we had been experimenting with circles for many, many months. And that was part of the work of Peter Senge and that group, if you're familiar with that world. We had people from 7 countries there, and that was how it got named the World Cafe. And we began to experiment. I was going to Latin America, our Scandinavian colleagues were going back to Europe working, and we decided we were going to come and reflect periodically on what were we learning, because something different had happened in that room. We discovered that even though we could call it a method, the World Cafe was actually a doorway. It was a doorway that we had never experimented with before in terms of how people could become wiser together, how collective intelligence works. And we began to develop, through the research, a set of principles. And this is going to, this will talk, we're going to be working with this as we work with the cafe. I'm right now setting the context. We earlier set the space up to create a hospitable space, right? So that when you walked in the room, it looked a little different. So in a sense, what we're going to be doing, I'm going to be reflecting on what we're doing so that you as leaders and facilitators yourselves can simultaneously not just be experiencing, but also understanding why it works or why it operates the way it does. We're going to be framing some core questions tonight that we'll be exploring, and also encouraging very lively contribution. We're going to be asking people to contribute your thinking, to speak your mind and heart, to listen, to understand, to inquire, so encouraging each person's contribution. We are going to be moving a lot tonight, and that's going to start in just a few minutes. Because one of the fundamental things that we've discovered is that when a system connects with itself in creative ways, collective intelligence emerges. That when we cross-pollinate ideas, just like in any ecosystem needs variety to be healthy, it's the same thing with ideas and thinking.
You say that again.
That systems diversity in any living system enables it to thrive and become robust and become healthy. And it's the same thing with our ideas and our collective thought. That as we connect in creative ways, the phenomenon of emergence of things that we could never have anticipated begin to reveal themselves, and we'll experiment with that. The other assumption underneath the World Cafe that we really have discovered in practice is fundamental, is that in most instances, of course we need input, right, at times, certain kinds of expertise. But the deeper knowledge and wisdom that we need to confront our most difficult issues actually exists oftentimes in the room itself, right? And that's an assumption that the World Cafe operates under. Shift your lens from the normal societal lens that conversation is trivial that it really is incidental among all the other things that we do, because the power of conversation as a core process is actually invisible to us most of the time. It's like breathing. It's like the air we breathe, and therefore we don't even notice it until it's not there. And that's what we're beginning perhaps to experience in our country right now, is that we're seeing that civil conversation, generative conversation, life-affirming conversation is becoming more scarce in these times. So for this moment, I want you to actually imagine that what the scientists are telling us is true, that conversation is a core process, and that these networks of conversation that are happening all the time is how we are co-evolving the future of the organization that we're associated with or work with. So imagining to think about, and you can pick any organization or community, but even if you looked at your own life this way, so you can adapt the question to what's important to you given where you are. What might you do differently? If you really accepted that this was at the heart of our collective capacity to make a positive difference in the world and in our organizations and communities, what might you be doing differently? Conversation as a core process by which we evolve. This is our co-evolutionary possibility together. This is how we create the realities we live in. And that networks of conversation, the networks you belong to or the networks that are just operating either in a constructive way or not, are also at the heart of our capacity to really make a difference. So generate as many ideas as possible about what you might be doing differently if you actually saw it that way yourself. And I want you to imagine putting on those glasses just for this part of the conversation. And take a couple of moments to make some, to take a little bit of quiet time to make some notes at the edge of your tablecloth. Right. Okay, everybody. We're going to continue the conversation, asking one host, it can be anyone, right, to stay at the table. The others are going to travel, mixing it up as much as you can. And as soon as you get to your spots, welcome the new travelers. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, and then you can just, you're going to do it and jump in, right? What I'm going to ask you to do is, you're going to change the table, the host is going to stay, the others are going to travel. If you are the host, remember you're trying to create a welcoming space at your table, right? A brave, safe, welcoming space. So that's your job as the host. And then, briefly, and the host can begin, but the others should jump in, sharing what were the insights or the key ideas that were beginning to come out at your table. But the others, the new ones, should be also saying, but at mine, something linked and connected to that. Or there's nothing in my conversation that had anything to do with this, but here's a little gem that came from mine. And you stick that in there, and someone is going to say, oh, and that reminds me of something that happened at my table, right? So that's what we're beginning to do, is to kind of create that web together. So you want to link and connect, and then deepen the conversation into what new possibilities, in particular, focus on the possibilities. What new possibilities does the conversation raise for you in terms of your own life or your own work? What new possibilities does that raise for you? We'll be dealing with questions afterwards. But what new possibilities, or if questions come up, also note those down, okay? Ready?
Is it clear what we're
Wait, is
doing?
it clear for everyone?
Is it clear for everybody what we're doing?